And now, please welcome the co-writers of the Academy Award-winning movie Spotlight, Tom McCarthy and Josh Singer.
Thank you very much. I will say I walked in here tonight with my wife, and we looked over that enormous cocktail reception, and she turned to me and said, I am so grateful to be in the company of these people. And we mean that from the bottom of our hearts. We hope you understand how important it is to us as citizens and consumers, and how grateful we are for the great work you're doing. So thank you personally. I am also grateful to be here to give this award to Marty Baron, someone who I now am fortunate enough to consider a friend. I'll say, I should also mention a surprise announcement. It's so inspiring to be here that Josh Singer has agreed to match Jeff Bezos' $1 million offer. Incredible. Incredible. You heard it here first.
That is a surprise.
It's incredible. One thing Josh and I learned rather quickly in our research for the film was that reporters and editors are not especially fond of being interviewed. They prefer to be the ones asking the questions, and not the other way around, put them on the receiving end of a few invasive inquiries. And it was incredibly impressive how quickly they turned the table, pelting us with a litany of questions ranging from our writing process to casting options to our favorite restaurants, anything to change the subject. Marty Baron was a bit different. Not only would he answer our questions with candor and specificity, but his replies, especially via email, arrived almost as soon as our questions were dispatched. It was almost unnerving how quickly and completely he would respond. Josh and I would just look at each other and say, doesn't this guy have a damn newspaper to run? It was like a game to see how quickly he would do it. In one particular email exchange, my production designer, Steve Carter, emailed Marty and said, can you please describe your office? Steve checked with me, he said, is it okay? I'm like, yeah, I'm pretty sure it's okay. 45 minutes later, he received a 2-page, extremely detailed response describing his office. I read this one excerpt. On my desk, this is one small excerpt. I kept 2 Rolodexes on my desk, one large, one small. Also on the upper left of the desk were an inbox and an outbox. Not much in the way of personal effects. As a farewell gift from Miami, I received a stuffed flamingo toy, and I draped it on the top of my computer. Another was a stuffed lobster toy, also received as a gift upon my departure from Miami, in parentheses, signaling symbols of the 2 places. Final comment. See attached for image of similar items. That is exactly how Marty operates. He is relentlessly accurate and highly efficient. He's been described as his colleagues as focused, fearless, ethical, unwavering, constant, and committed. His success at the Miami Herald, Boston Globe, and Washington Post have been no accident. There is a purity to his approach, a simplicity even, the simplicity of a master craftsman. Do your job, do it well, and do it consistently. But I will add that Marty is not without a sense of humor, which is something we were reminded of the very first time we showed him our cut of Spotlight. We invited him up to New York, Josh and I. We were obviously incredibly nervous. Showing it to producers is one thing. Showing it to the editor of the Washington Post is a whole nother thing. Marty arrived with a friend of his from Reuters, I believe, an old colleague. We showed them the movie. Josh and I sat in the lobby sweating it out for 2 hours as they sat in the screening room and watching the film, just listening, nothing, dead silence. Not that it was a laugher, but we thought we'd hear something. Finally, we went in there, and Marty seemed pleased. His first comment was, well, one thing I appreciated, and we're like bated breath, he says, the elevator didn't work, and you got that right. We took it, Josh and I high-fived. But then his colleague turned to us and said, you know, he thought it was a very good movie. He was a little disappointed in the portrayal of Marty. He said Marty was a bit warmer than we portrayed him and had a bit more of a sense of humor. And Marty listened, turned to his friend, and dryly noted, I didn't then.
Now, by all accounts, that was the case. And in fact, and this is true, Marty had a Post-it on his desk that read, "I am not warm and fuzzy." And that's how the newsroom saw him back, in 2001. But 10 years later, in 2012, Tom and I got a very different vibe. In fact, we were on the train headed up to Boston to visit the Globe when the news broke that Marty was leaving the Globe to head to the Post. And we walked into the newsroom, and I think it's fair to say that the mood was fairly dour. Robbie Robinson summed it up as soon as we saw him. He said, "Bad day for the Globe, good day for the Post." And I think we saw it in the eyes and the expressions of every reporter we talked to that day, and we talked to quite a few. Even in the somewhat bristly town of Boston, Marty had become a beloved leader and a friend, a man who they'd come to deeply admire and to trust. Of course, back in November of 2012, little did we know it wasn't just a good day for the Post, it was a good day for all of us. And regardless of where you sit on the political spectrum, I think you can't help but be impressed with what Marty and the Post have done, becoming once again one of the most vital members of the national press and a crucial check on power. Almost 50 years ago, in the face of another challenging president, a few papers led us out of darkness, none more bravely than Katharine Graham and Ben Bradley's Washington Post. I am quite certain that if Katharine Graham and Ben Bradley were here today, they would consider Marty Baron and his Washington Post a worthy successor and heir to that legacy, and they would, as I do every night, and as Tom does and our wives do, sleep a little easier knowing that Marty is there and the Post is there trying to lead us out of darkness. Thank you, Marty.
Same with kids.
That was brutal, Tom. Really brutal. I wasn't expecting that. Thank you for this honor, and thank you anyway to Tom and Josh, a genuine thank you for introducing me. Tom and Josh have become good friends, as they mentioned, even if, as they also mentioned, they portrayed me in Spotlight as someone with absolutely no sense of humor. And they've become members of the journalism family, perhaps dismayed to discover that once you're in, there is no escape. I'm recalling when Tom made a different kind of introduction, connecting me with Liev Schreiber so that we could meet at the Post. Liev had heard that I was, in his words, totally inscrutable. Perhaps Tom or Josh told him that. Afterward, Tom emailed to ask me how it went. And I wrote, "I sense he finds me frustrating to fully understand. He wouldn't be the first to feel that." And I asked what Liev thought. And Tom wrote back, he thought it went very well, and he was frustrated to not fully understand you. Whatever public image I have is in disproportionate part due to what Tom, Josh, and Liev made it in the movie. I feel indebted to them and many others because the film highlighted our overarching mission as journalists, to hold powerful institutions and individuals to account. The public could see in compelling form why the press needs to do that, what it takes to do it right, and how hard the task can be. I've always been fortunate to work among journalists who never hesitated to do the work the public expected of us. They often withstood intense pressures. The late Anthony Lewis, New York Times columnist and First Amendment scholar, once wrote, "The American press has been given extraordinary freedom by the Supreme Court's interpretation of the First Amendment. In return, it owes society courage." Publishers, owners, and my newsroom colleagues at the Miami Herald, the Los Angeles Times, the New York Times, the Boston Globe, and the Washington Post always displayed that courage. Many of my Post colleagues are here tonight. They have done the real work that has earned your praise. I get to collect the awards. Special thank you to the publishers I've had as a top editor. Alberto Ibargüen at the Miami Herald, who was the first to bet on me to lead a newsroom, even after we got into a spirited argument over front page ads. Richard Gilman, Steve Ainsley, and Chris Mayer at the Boston Globe, and Catherine Weymouth, and now Fred Ryan at the Post. To our good fortune, Fred has led the revival at the Post. And thank you to the owners, Tony Ritter at Knight Ritter, who stood behind us at the Miami Herald when the newsroom did its own recount of the 2000 presidential election results in Florida when the U.S. Supreme Court would not allow one. To Arthur Sulzberger Jr. at the New York Times Company, who gave the Globe its independence and the independence it needed for its Catholic Church investigation and many other stories. And now Jeff Bezos at the Washington Post. And Don Graham before him. Don supported us in the Don Graham supported us in the NSA surveillance investigation, and Jeff endured menacing threats from our president during the campaign. Never once did he waver. Instead, he said what had to be said, calmly and with strength. He said, "We have fundamental laws and we have constitutional rights in this country to free speech. But that's not the whole reason that it works here. We also have cultural norms that support that, where you don't have to be afraid of retaliation. And those cultural norms are at least as important as the Constitution." I am grateful for that statement and for his support, and of course for the overwhelming generosity of his contribution to the Reporters Committee. He couldn't be here, but his heart is. At every turn in my career, I have worked with careful and courageous lawyers. They are heroes. They kept me out of trouble. They helped us get the story. When we nailed down the facts, they were invaluable in finding a path to publish. And at the Post, we have a remarkable team right here. Rigorous, reassuring, determined, and delightful. I'm glad they are here. Jay Kennedy, Jim McLaughlin, Kalea Clark, Aaron Getzel. Eric Lieberman was a colleague when I joined the Post before he left for Fusion. And we've received invaluable assistance from tonight's honoree, Davis Wright Tremaine, particularly from Laura Hanman. And of course, we regularly turn to Williams and Connolly, our outside counsel, particularly Kevin Bain and Tom Hentoff. At the Miami Herald, as a reporter and later as an editor, I was wisely advised by Sam Turilli, Sandy Borer, and Robert Beatty. At the LA Times, it was Jeff Klein, Carlene Galler, Robert Lobdell, and Bill Neese. At the New York Times Company, pre-reporter Adam Liptak, today's speaker, David McCraw, George Freeman, and Kinra Sherry were fearless and resourceful. And I owe so much to John Albano, the Boston Globe's outside counsel, whose success at gaining access to internal church documents was vital to our investigation. John was brilliant. We could not have broken that story without a great lawyer. I'm sure I've left out some names. There are just too many lawyers in my life. But I should wrap up. So let me end by saying this. Being an awardee, along with Paul Steiger and Kathleen Carroll and Gwen Ifill, is very meaningful to me. Gwen was a model for all of us, and in her abilities and in her grace. Paul hired me, as he mentioned, at the LA Times in 1979. Yes, I was very young, with only 3 years of experience. Since then, he has been a mentor, an inspiration, and a dear friend. Kathleen was in Knight Ritter's DC bureau when I was editor of the Miami Herald. And even as we constantly tested each other, we magically became friends. I admire her immensely. I am honored to be in their company tonight and to be in yours. I am honored to have spent my life as a journalist, and more than anything, to be a journalist in these times. Thank you.
So I come back to the podium just with one small coda. It's something that's probably in the minds of all of you. Just how successful, how big has this crowd been? How successful has the dinner been? I'm thrilled to report that tonight, this dinner and this event and this committee has raised $1.9 million. Money that will go toward making sure that every journalist who needs them has legal services through the Reporters Committee. So thank you all for coming. Thank you for sharing your time and your treasure. If you were the winning bidder for a cartoon, stop off and pick it up. Drive safely. Have a nice rest of the evening.